Well, hey, how's it going? Happy Thursday and happy sketch session day. I'm so glad you found your way back to another session or that you found your way to your very first sketch session with me. Let me just make sure that, yep, I'm seeing myself, excellent. Well, if you're here for the very first time, if you're catching this video recording, I'm just kind of stumbling across it. My name is Carolyn Peters. I'm the owner of Kira Studios, and that's where I teach classical drawing skills. So artists can build a super solid foundation to explore their creative voice from. And in line with what I offer at Kira, I do these weekly sketch sessions. It's a free service that I put together for anybody who needs it and wants it. And I rotate subject matter. We have a cycle of 4. We go from figure to portrait to animals to inanimate things. And with every new subject matter, I always offer a new focus. So often there's a very specific lesson. And like that, I'm trying to combine a really good mixture of having a place for you to report to where you can stretch and strengthen your skill set and practice very particular lessons, as well as having a place to report to where you can put me on mute and you can just draw along with the reference material and just do it your way, whatever you need at that given moment, and just know that there are others drawing along with you. And oh, hey Bill, and hey Ted, so good to see you back. I'm so glad you're excited for the topic. So tonight we're back to portraits. Yay! Can't go wrong with portraits, and have a beautiful model lined up. Hey Chris, good to see you too. But the subject matter, no, excuse me, the lesson or the focus that we're bringing to, yay, Steph is in the house as well. Awesome. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked by the chat here. The focus we're bringing to tonight is working on toned paper. So, of course, there are many different ways that you can work on toned paper. I'm just going to offer you 2 main ways for when you have very little amount of time and when you have a little bit of more time. And if you haven't drawn a lot of portraits, definitely go through the previous videos, because there is one I did on construction, facial construction. There's several ones on those actually. And there's one on local valley that will be really useful. Hello, Kija. Good to see you too. Okay, so let me just explain what I have prepared for us, and then we'll dive right in. I don't have a lot of prep talk today. It's not like last week where we had in-depth anatomy lesson. So the main thing you want to know when you work on toned paper is you want to feel the texture of it. So there is a wide variety of toned papers. You can buy single sheets, or you can buy entire pads, and you will notice that depending on the brand, they all have a different surface quality. Some of them are rather slick and some of them are rather bumpy. And so I want to explain to you what type is good for what. So the bumpier your paper is, the softer of a medium will you want to use. The reason why it has those bumps is so the pigment, the fine dust can settle into the pores of the paper, and there's some grit for it to hold on to. It's almost like a piece of sandpaper that kind of sands off the chalk or the charcoal. So having compressed charcoal, having charcoal pencils, chalk, pastels, all of those work really well on the bumpier papers. You just want to make sure that you're on the correct side, and that depends brand by brand. Some brands put the sticker on the side that you need to draw on, and other papers put the sticker on the back. So how do you know which side to draw on? You see which side of the paper is slightly less textured. So that's usually the side you want to draw on. If, however, you have some of the toned paper that's very smooth and slick, I would recommend that either for colored pencils, graphite, or what I'll demo in the beginning, markers. So again, you don't have as much texture. Those 3 media that I just explained or that I just mentioned, they don't need so much tooth to hold on to. So I'm working on a rather smooth tone paper tonight, so you'll be seeing me work in pen. And then later on, when I switch into charcoal, I'll use a kind of charcoal that's not very dusty. It's actually almost more like a graphite pencil. So that's the first thing. The second thing, those are two things. The third thing I wanted to mention is, why do we even bother with toned paper, aside from that it's looking cool? The main thing that it does is it builds value for you. As in, it builds your midtone. If you're scratching your head and you're like, well, what the heck's a midtone? Definitely go back to the lesson I did on midtones, the 1 hour sketch session on midtones. But it's basically that range where it's not the highlight, it's not the light area next to the highlight, but it's also not your shadow. It's a little segment in between. And so, if you've been to an art supply store, which most of you will have been, and you've been seeing those aisles and aisles of different toned papers. You can have a blue toned paper, you can have a brown toned paper, you have a dark gray, light gray. So you've seen the variety. So when you choose your paper for the drawing of the day, you want to ask yourself, what am I drawing? Like if you're drawing a portrait, what's your model's complexion? If they're very fair skinned, I wouldn't choose a super dark value of your toned paper. Why? Because the tone of the paper is supposed to be your mid-tone. That's the whole idea. You use your dark, your charcoal or whatever you have for your shadows, you use the paper for your mid-tone, and then you use either a white chalk pencil or a white color pencil or a white marker for the lights. Get it? So that's what it's for. And so with that comes the next thing. Keep your values separate. Never ever do you want to mix your charcoal with the white. And there I said never ever. Of course, there's always ways where you can break that rule. But in general, if you're working on toned paper, that's the idea. You let the paper do the heavy lifting for building the middle tone rather than smudging the two together. It also kind of looks gross. Like it kind of looks dirty when you smudge the charcoal and the white chalk together. Yeah, so with that, I have 4 images prepared for us. The first 2, I'll time us for about 10 minutes. So again, I'll be working in marker. So these are going to be quick. So just, use them to warm up, use them to get some crappy drawings out of your system. And then for the next 2, I'll slow them down to 20, 25 minutes, something like that. So we have some more time to get into some details. And again, the beauty of this is, you can draw along with me and you can listen, you can even just watch, and then you can come back and pause the image that you like the most and keep drawing from that for however long you want. So you use this the way you want to. So in that, I don't know what I was going to say. I'm going to switch the scene. That's what I'm doing now. I'm going to transition into my screen, and I'm going to begin by showing you an image by, this is Millet. So you may know that there are 2 Millets. There's an English Millet who's spelled M-I, oh gosh, I'm bad at spelling. It's with an A-I at the end and an S at the end. This one is the French Millet, who's spelled like millet, M-I-L-L-E-T. So the reason why I'm showing this is just, it's such a beautiful example of what I was just talking about. You see, where's my mouse here? If you can see my mouse. So this is the tone of the paper, like fairly light to middle value. So, looks like this model was Caucasian, and her mid-tone in the skin is just the paper. Then any highlights he's starting to build up with the white chalk. And then anything that is a shadow, he uses the charcoal. And then notice the areas that are a darker local value, meaning a darker pigmentation. So skin pigmentation here is light, hair pigmentation is dark. So here, he's not dragging his white chalk into that area. So having control over your local values is really important. So the highlight here, even though that is a light, but it's not of the local value that you picked the paper for. So he picked this paper because this is her skin tone, and anything else like that's darker won't get any white. Hope that made sense. All right, so let's get this out of the way. And here's our first image. And yeah, let's have some fun. So as I said, well, I don't know if I said it, but I usually say it. I look at these sessions as part workout sessions, you know, where like you get sweaty and do some hard things. And also part play sessions, experimentation sessions, sessions where you try things out and have fun, and if they fall flat, then so be it. So I'm working with a Staedtler Fine Liner, pigment liner. Try not to get too big because it's such a fine point, so this might almost be too big. And I'm beginning with just a shape, finding my brow line. Nose, lip. So the beginning of my drawing is always just getting set up. And I think I'm focused. So if you're not sure where to begin, as I said, do your best for tonight and then go back and watch some of the videos where I focus on structure and proportions. So the way I'm setting up my portraits is I follow kind of what's called the Loomis method. It's a little bit adapted, but it begins by looking at where's the brow line. And the images that I'm working from, or that we are working from tonight, are all going to be slightly from a lower angle. So that's perfect if you were here last month for portraits, because that's exactly what we practiced, right? We talked about those rubber bands and snapping them the right way. We talked about not forgetting the underside of the jaw. So you can piece yourself a whole lesson together if you would like. So in the beginning, one thing I'll do a lot is I'll squint, just to kind of see what areas, like in squinting pretty hard, like if I squint and zoom out, like squinting, zooming out to see the whole head, what areas kind of visually group together. Almost thinking about them as puzzle pieces. So I'm not just thinking in terms of outlining the features, I'm also thinking in terms of which planes are kind of angled away from the light and therefore darker, and which ones are angled at the light and therefore lighter. And I like just kind of, again, as I said, thinking of them as a puzzle piece and then drawing that whole shape in rather than just kind of outlining the nostril to begin with. So kind of beginning with a more general shape. And then if I have time, working on slightly smaller sub-shapes. So again, in order to see where's my light shadow separation, the photos were taken on a overcast day, so the light is diffused, but you can still tell where the darks are and where the lights are. And I said I was going to time us, right? Of course, I didn't look at the clock, but I'm looking at the clock now. So the reason why I'm working in marker aside from this being a slicker paper, it's also, if I only have 10 minutes, the potential of nuance that's kind of laying there for you when you're working in charcoal, it's kind of wasted, you know. Of course you can still work in charcoal if you only have 10 minutes. I don't mean to say that, you know, you can't do that. But if I only have 10 minutes, then it's often like the perfect chance to play with pen and ink. Just because with pen and ink, I don't know, I feel like you have to be more decisive, and it kind of encourages me to make bold choices if I only have little time. Okay, so again, I'm squinting. Here's the thing. If you look under her chin, like that under side of the jaw, I want you to listen very closely. If you only allow your eyes to rest on that area in between her chin and the neck, that underside of the jaw, if you only allow your eyes to rest on that area, what will happen is your iris will adjust. Your iris will start to open up and let more light in, because that's what your eyes do. Whatever you put their focus on, they will adjust either smaller or wider to let more light in. And so as you're sitting there looking at this kind of darker value under her chin, just looking there, not letting your eye look anywhere else, you will think to yourself, I see so much light in there. This is so luminous. It's just clearly, we need to have some white in there. Anybody, give me a white pencil. And you'll be all excited about putting that reflected light in. And I urge you not to do that. It's probably the hardest thing in the beginning when you're learning to use tone paper, is to leave the shadows alone. Like, don't put any white in there, and I'll tell you why. You don't need to just, you know, take my word at face value. You can, the reason is that if you separate, or if you visually break open your values by putting white in there, the value, or the shadow shape, excuse me, I meant to say the shadows. If you visually break open your shadow shapes by putting white in there, the shadow shapes can't do their job as well. And the shadow shape's job is to build form. And so if you break this open, you're contradicting any light logic you're trying to build, and you're also contradicting this illusion of form you're trying to build. So leave them alone, leave them dark. And if you really want to bring that luminosity in, then you work on darkening what's called the core shadow, the edge of the shadow, and that it's called simultaneous contrast. It will evoke a simultaneous contrast in here, which means this will appear lighter. Okay, so now that I have this, I'm going to switch over. I have about 3 more minutes. I'm using this kind of gel pen. I'm not a huge fan. I tested it out earlier, and it's kind of not letting the ink out as nicely as I wanted it to, but we'll just make do. So when I apply the white, I try and go cross contour. I try and hatch cross contour, and so I'm thinking of the facets of every part of the face, and the facets of the face that angle at the light source most directly, they will get most of this kind of cross contour hatching treatment. Facets that don't angle up at the light as directly, like that left side of the nose, I'm going to leave that the tone of the paper. Same with the right side of the nose. They're not really shadows. Like if you compare that to what's happening under the chin, this is lighter, but it's not as bright as what's happening on the cheeks. See, that's what I mean. Like this kind of clogs up. So I go cross contour, and then I try to transition out of this. So So again, I let this kind of transition into the tone of the paper as we get towards the creases by the nose. And then under here, I go back to using the white pen. Then here in the Filtrum, I'm going to use no white. I will say that with the gel pens, it's kind of hard to, what's the word I'm looking for? Control, that's what I'm trying to say. It's kind of hard to control how light or dark it is. Like I was trying to make this slightly darker than what's happening up here, and it's tricky. So you can, if you like this idea of using ink, it might be better to just have a dipping pen. I kind of like doing that at times. See, like if I kind of angle it at the side, I'm kind of letting a little bit less of this ink out. But it's a bit of a pain in the ass. And then here we have the whole hair area being a light local value. So you could even kind of get in here and establish kind of a flat value field for what's happening in the hair. Okay, but I'm going past the 10 minutes, so I'm going to switch the picture. Again, I'm just trying to use this as a warm-up. So let's go on to the next one. They're all very similar anyway, so I'm going to zoom in. It's just slightly different positions. Oop, that was a bit too big. Nope. There we go, that seems good. Okay, so I'm gonna do one more in this kind of pen and ink or marker method, and then the next ones I'll switch into charcoal. So my first marks there for the underdrawing. And for the underdrawing, I begin with just the most simplified shape of the head, which is an egg, right? And that egg, I'm being cautious to make sure whether it's a truly upright egg or if there's a slight lean. And then once I have that, I get into the brow line, like imagining that there's a rubber band snapped around where the brow line is. And so the brow line ring will match up with the top of the ear. Be careful with where you place that ear, because that will orient the 3D orientation of the head. So I brought this ear shape closer to the edge of the head, so I have enough room for my center line here. Got my center line, kind of paid attention, how much of that far side do I see? How much of the close side do I see? And then the next thing I'm interested in is the corner of the eyebrow, which is kind of hidden by her bangs, but I'm kind of just imagining where that would be. Giving myself a little clue there, almost invisible to you guys maybe. And then that I have that, I keep working on the planar structure. Oh, and by the way, the reason why I picked pen and ink for the first two is because we're still in the last few days of October, and some people make it Inktober, whether officially or unofficially, their own version. But I always like to kind of focus on ink towards the end of the year for some reason as well. And but I also know that a lot of people get intimidated by pen and ink, and just because there's so many choices out there. So if you're not already on my mailing list, you can get yourself on my mailing list, and there is, you'll, as a kind of welcome gift, you'll get a free guide on, a free tool guide, a pen and ink tool guide, explaining the big difference between pen and ink tools, like the one thing you have to kind of be aware of before you make your choice, and which type of tools will yield what kind of results. There's even a couple of shopping lists for different type of kits. If you just want to put together a simple pen and ink kit, a travel kit, there are a couple of those in there as well. So the link for that is in the description if you're interested. I'd love to get to chat with you via email. Okay, so see, I'm kind of still working on the structure. I should probably speed up a little bit knowing that I don't have a ton of time, so I was kind of dilly-dallying here. So I'm looking at where are the edges of the shadows, and for that I gotta squint. Get my head out of the way. So again, in order to see those facets, those planes of the face that aren't catching as much light, you gotta squint. And again, not just squinting and then kind of just staring at one part. You gotta squint and zoom out. Zoom out to see the whole thing that you're drawing, whether it's a person or a tree or a glass cup. That really doesn't matter. Gotta see it in the context of the entirety. Okay. And so with a fine liner, I can control how dark I get much more than the white ink. The white ink was kind of hard to control, so I can get some nuance with the fine liner, and that'll hopefully make up for any lacking nuance in the white. As I said, if you are interested in more nuance with the white as well, I recommend getting a dipping pen. And again, you'll get my best recommendations in that guide for what nib to choose, etc. So now that I have this, I'm going to give myself 2 more minutes, and I've been squinting, and I'm also kind of logically thinking, where's the light coming from? So which facets are angling up the most? And then I kind of hatch with the orientation of that facet. So either with or across and over. And the brighter you make something, the more it'll want to pop forward. So make sure you make the closer part of the face the brighter part, unless of course the lighting is set up differently. But that usually creates a visual confusion. Even though we call it the white of the eye, and even though like our brain wants to tell us this is white, it's a very bad idea to put white in there. It's just a much cooler area, but since it's kind of recessed into the brain socket, the eye socket, it doesn't catch as much light as we think it does. Okay, 1 last minute. And again, if you liked a certain pose a ton, you can always come back to it. Okay, so I'm making this official. I'm really not in love with this brand of the gel pen, so I can't recommend this one to you guys. But you see how it works though. Like, I hope that it makes sense. Okay, so let me switch images and I'm gonna flip my page over and get into some charcoal. So the brand I like to use for charcoal on the slicker paper is the Cretacolor Nero. I'm gonna give myself about 15-20 minutes, a little bit longer. I'm actually looking at the clock this time right away. Trying to get the light a little bit closer too. So again, I begin with my shape, it's a mixture between a guitar pick and an egg, and I'm paying attention to the left to right orientation. And I'm also thinking about if there was an axis driven through this imaginary egg, which way would that axis point? Like, is there a tilt to it? Is one end closer or further away from me? And then once I have that, finding the brow angle and thinking about that kind of like a rubber band that's snapping around. And the more you're looking up at the model, the more extreme this curve is going to be. Like, you can almost think of it as an angle like this. So wherever that corner of the brow is, you kind of get this little peak. And that's why some artists deconstruct the head into a box, saying this is the front face of the box, this is the side face of the box. And because I only have so little time, and today's focus was not on proportions or structure, I'm not measuring as carefully the distance between the nose and the brow and the hairline. Usually, like if I'm focusing on structure, I'd be sitting here like taking increments and measuring that. But you pick your battles or your focus, you know, and say, okay, today I want to strengthen this technique, so I'm gonna allow myself to drop the proportion component. Maybe if it drops, like, I'm not gonna beat myself up over it. Here's my eraser. There. And so if you do make some underdrawing marks in areas where later on you'll have white, just make sure you keep them super faint and erasable, because as I said, it looks really messy when you mix white chalk and charcoal, and later on I'll be drawing over this area. I'll erase before I make my white marks. Keeping my eyes aligned, making sure that the tops are going to stay aligned. And so now I'm starting to get in this phase where I'm squinting. I'm squinting to locate my darker value groups. So I almost got sucked into too much detail here. Again, squinting, zooming out to see other shadowy areas. And so I'm going to test two types of white chalk. So this is the Koh-i-Noor Gioconda white chalk, and then I have a different brand there. I'm going to test out if they're any different from each other. Oops. And I'm erasing my charcoal before I get into any of the areas where I'm using the white chalk. Now, when I draw hair, I try not so much make my marks in line with individual strands. Like I try to think more in terms of creating a flat value and then teasing out the texture of the hair on the edge. So if you were here when we drew hedgehogs, we focused on texture. You might remember that I was talking about that texture is best indicated at the edges of your shapes, not so much in the center. And as I'm applying my white chalk, I'm not pressing all the way. I apologize, it's hard for me today to tell if my image is focused or not. So I'm sorry if you're just watching and you're getting annoyed by that. I think sometimes when I get my head in the picture, the camera refocuses. So here the whole local value of the hair is light, so I'm shading flat, no tan. Not as in like no tan, this lady doesn't have a tan, but as in N-O-T-A-N, one word, meaning a flat treatment of an area. Okay, so let's get into the face. And I'm looking for, again, those facets. And I'm kind of taking away any of those little snags of charcoal that happen during the underdrawing stage. And the inner perfectionist in me is screaming, it doesn't look like her! And then I have to remind myself, I don't care! It's not the lesson tonight. You only have 15 minutes. Let it go. So if you're having conversations like that with yourself too, know that you're not alone. Or if you don't have conversations like that with yourself, you might want to start, because they do keep you on track. So I'm beginning lightly because I don't quite know yet in the context of the face to the hair how light I want to get. So I'm just kind of beginning with a light treatment of the white areas. And then, oh, thanks Keija, thanks for letting me know. I'm glad to hear that it's just on my end where it looks fuzzy. nose area. About 5 more minutes. And so lips varies, of course, person to person. But since their lips are not the same as our regular skin, they're more of a membrane rather than outer skin, and they have much more blood in them, so they have a darker local value most of the time. So even though these lips are angling up at the light and there are highlights there, the local value is darker. So I'm going to leave them the value of the paper for now, and maybe I'll plop a little highlight on it, especially like if she was wearing lip gloss, or I wanted to make her lip look shiny, I might plop a little artificial highlight on there. So that's something that happens. Like if you make a highlight very sharp, it will make that area look almost like glassy. Okay, so I'm starting to press a little harder. So with most of these white chalk pencils, what I'm finding, I don't know if it's, I'm thinking it's because this kind of paper, what I'm finding is that there is not a huge range of value. Like I can gradate, or wrong term, I can vary the value with charcoal quite a bit. You know, I can get into some really nice deep darks, but with a white, it's either white or not. Like there's very little gradation potential, and I think it is because this paper doesn't have a lot of grit, and so I can't layer the white as well. So other papers I've used in the past are the Canson tone papers, and I feel like with those they're a little bit easier to get that nuanced white value. I hear ya. You know, we just gotta let it go. It's like if you're working on toned paper, then that's your lesson for tonight. If you're not working on toned paper, then maybe you can pay a little bit closer attention to those proportions. But you know, it's just versions of her. And I think that's why a good advice for people who start their artistic training is to don't practice by drawing your closest friends until you've, or your closest family members, people you really care about, until you've mastered a few principles and techniques, because it's so disheartening and embarrassing, and I don't know, when you try and capture the ones so near and dear to you and then it doesn't work out, you know, and then you feel really deflated, and it's just makes it really hard. So it's much better to just work from people's likeness you don't know, and they're not going to be offended if you didn't capture them 100%, and there's no need to explain yourself, you know, it's just okay. So I'll give myself another minute or two, and even though this is nowhere near finished, you're starting to see now this is a slightly different look, more potential for nuance, and then we'll do the last one for 25 minutes, because I talked a little bit in the beginning, so we'll go a little bit beyond 8:30. I'm gonna add just a little bit of shadow underneath her lip, and then put a little highlight there. So when the light is diffused like this, It's the only time when it's okay to have these kind of open shadow patterns. But even still, like I'm still pretty trying to make my patterns, my shadows, like a shape that others could cut out for me. See, so a little highlight there makes it look like almost she has a bit of lip gloss on. All right, next and last image. And for that one, we'll give ourselves a bit more time. Very similar, just kind of rotate it a bit more toward us. Eyes looking in a slightly different direction. I think this is good enough. And I wanted to stay zoomed out a little bit because I kind of love the shape that her neck dress collar thing is creating. Okay, what's this here? It's the soft. So if you don't know this, when you work in charcoal, you want to work with the harder charcoal pencils in the underdrawing phase. And then only when you're going for full value, you need those really dark darks, you start to switch into a softer grade. So I'm placing my center line, kind of explaining how much of the left side I see, how much of the right side I see. This is kind of where the corner of my eyebrow is. It's almost a frontal position, so you may almost see both of them. So brow to bottom of the nose should be equal. Bottom of the nose to the chin, not the underside of the chin, just kind of like the beginning of the chin. Since we have an upshot on her, it might be that this is bigger, like the chin to nose might be bigger than the nose to the brow. And then the next third, so chin to nose, nose to brow, brow to hairline, those should be equal in a frontal point of view. From a strong underside angle, you might get larger shapes here, slightly smaller, slightly smaller. So even right now, I'm already starting to squint. And again, when I squint, my goal is to get rid of her beautiful eyes. Not because I mind her eyes, just because I want to see the kind of shadowy shapes. Because those shadowy shapes will become the stage for those beautiful eyes. And they have to be right. When I draw the mouth, I begin at the center to ensure that I get an even drawing. I can't remember if I did a portrait session where we focused on the mouth. I know we did one on the nose. Can't remember if we did lips as well. Again, making myself squint so I can see, is there a shape under the lower lip that's shadowy? What does that look like if I had to cut it out? So I thought drawing her in her kind of spooky costume is perfect for the week before Halloween, and getting us into the mood for Saturday. Getting some of that hair shape. And when I lay in shapes, you may notice that I always use straight angles, not in the gesture phase. In the gesture phase, I allow myself to use curvy lines. They're perfect for building rhythms and fluidity and energy. But when I want to become more specific, I break that into angles. Okay. Okay, so before I get into the eyes, I'm going to start working on the lights. So I'm switching to the Stabilo Carbothello white, and I'll report back if there's any difference, if they're behaving both in the same way on this paper. Of course, the important part is that you always have a super fine point on it, especially if you're drawing small. It's like working in a kitchen with an unsharpened knife, and trying to cut some what's that thing called? Butternut squash. It's like you gotta have a sharp knife for that, or you're gonna chop your finger off. And like similarly, when we draw, we gotta have a fine point, or we're just gonna, blunt the drawing. So again, I'm applying my light cross contour, thinking about kind of stretching my marks across and over the form, unless I'm working on a whole value block. So just so you understand what I'm trying to say here. In the cheeks, my goal right now is to build form. My goal is to make those look three-dimensional, and I want to gradate. I want to gradate from kind of slightly darker to brighter and even brighter areas. And in the hair, I wouldn't have that goal as much. In the hair, my goal would be more in establishing the idea that the entire hair block is lighter than the skin block, or the skin shape. If you think back to that image I showed you in the beginning, like Millet, he was establishing that the hair of his wife is darker than her skin by just evenly shading. And then he was gradating a little bit towards the highlight. So when you see me erase my underdrawing, it's because, as I mentioned, I don't want to mix the charcoal and the white, but it's also like there's usually a little bit of a leftover, so I don't feel like, I'm going to be scared if I erase it out, nothing is going to be left. There's always going to be a little something left, and it's just you're making it better at that point. So far, I feel like I have slightly more control over this Carbothello one, as opposed to, what was the other brand? The other one was a Koh-i-Noor. But it's still pretty hard to control, but it's slightly better. So if I had to recommend one over the other, I'd recommend the Carbothello. So when we draw and we get frustrated with it not looking the way we want it to look, we usually blame the details. We didn't get the mouth right. We didn't get, just, I don't know, the hair right. Like we usually think like we need to put more information in to make this thing better. And most of the time, not always of course, but a lot of the time it's actually not in those smaller shapes that made it not look like the thing you wanted it to look like. It's actually in the big shapes. So if you're in one of my classes, you'd always hear me say, zoom out, lean back, zoom out, see the entirety, compare it to the rest of the thing you're drawing, see it in context. I mean, there would be a constant barrage of that kind of thing because, again, we're so detail oriented. I think especially as artists, we kind of delight in seeing all the nuances, and we're good at seeing the nuances, usually better than others, you know? And so it's kind of hard not to do the thing that you think you're good at. And it takes discipline to do the thing that's not as sexy. Like, who wants to look at belly blocks? I just want to look at an eyeball. I want to look at the lashes. I want to look at the things that have names. So you're seeing my pencil tip hopping over. So I'm trying to make sure that my eyes are aligned with each other so that one isn't sagging lower than the other. So I have about 5-7 more minutes. So the longer you get into a portrait, the more you'll get into this phase of nudging your shapes. A little bit less over here, a little bit more over here. And especially when you draw small like me, but even if you draw slightly bigger than this, the changes you'll make, they're like incremental. And yet all of a sudden, like you might add just like 2 strokes and all of a sudden, like it sinks into place. The shape kind of goes in there, like it's the person all of a sudden. And for that, it really kind of takes a mental slowing down and a patience, like a commitment to patience. And so I had to think about it because I was noticing, okay, I'm getting very quiet, which is fine. You know, you don't need to hear me talk all the time, but that happens when you're kind of starting to really shift into the flow state, where you're kind of getting beyond the verbal way of kind of thinking more with words, and you're just kind of responding, you're kind of visually responding, a little bit more here, a little bit less here. But it's, again, not in a spoken way, it's just in a response way, if that makes sense. And this is also usually the stage when you're like really wrestling with a drawing. So it's like we don't quite know yet who will gain the upper hand, the drawing or the artist. And sometimes the drawing wins, and sometimes the artist wins, and sometimes both win, and sometimes nobody wins. But it's all, I think, to me, always worth it. It's like, even if I come up with just complete shit, it's just like, all right, at least I sat for an hour or two or whatever it is, and took some time for the side of me that I really value, that creative side, that side that processes things by looking carefully, by analyzing, by slowing down, like all that good stuff. Like, where else do I do that in my life? I mean, you know, like sometimes if I'm being very virtuous, I might meditate or do some yoga, but that's far and few in between. And so having this drawing practice, you know, you gotta find one thing in life that kind of reinforces all the good. And I think drawing is a perfect practice for that. All right, I'll go for about 2 or 3 more minutes. And to me, if you read my email today, I was writing about kind of this tendency that but some artists have, like this tendency to be really fundamentalist about, like, oh, you always have to do it this way, and you always have to do it that way, and you follow exactly these steps, and then you always get this perfect result. And like, sure, you can do that, but you're kind of cutting yourself off from a lot of surprises and from a lot of explorations. What's the word I'm looking for? There's a different word I'm looking for. Discoveries. You're kind of cutting yourself off from a lot of potential discoveries of, like, oh, I would have never thought I could draw it this way had I not, you know, kind of stayed more fluid in my approach. And sure, sometimes it's frustrating. It's like, oh, why can't I just, like, you know, always hit it on the mark and always turn out with something good. But I think the benefits of not having these rote techniques that you just kind of plug and play and, you know, you always get the same result. I think the benefits outweigh the frustrations that come along with, like, okay, I guess that one didn't work out. You learn more. Oh, I'm so glad, Steph. Yay, I did my job. I can go home now. I made one person draw that hasn't drawn in a while. So in my college class, my university class, they have to keep a sketchbook because I want to encourage them to just kind of process the world constantly through pen or pencil. And I always want them to think like, you know, when you sat down that day to do your 15 minutes of drawing, they don't have to do more, just 15 minutes. No matter what the outcome, pat yourself on the back, you know, just like give yourself a mental high five. I don't know, put on your favorite music and do a little jiggy around the room for having completed the thing that you signed up to do. Like you signed up for a drawing class, we know you want to do that, but you got to celebrate even the shitty drawings. And then if you had some that hit it out of the park and they're just gorgeous, then you can pop some champagne or kombucha or, you know, whatever it is that kind of makes it super special. And like, there you go, you have an even more special celebration. But it's like every time you draw, you gotta congratulate yourself. It's so important. Alrighty. Well, it's not completely horrible, but I'm not sure if I love it. But, you know, there it is. But at least now you've seen me go through a couple of processes, and maybe that'll give you a better understanding of how you take this even further. And I know I was talking about, oh, and the collar is so cool, and I wanted to have it all zoomed out so we could have the collar as a shape, and then I didn't even get to that. But alas, I'll just imply that just a little bit. Oh, and see what I'm doing here? So I'm placing my pencil on the edge of the face, on the contour of the face, and rather than making a line, so the outline would kind of destroy this illusion you're trying to build. You're trying to build this illusion of this is three-dimensional and this is, you know, real. But if you put an outline around it, you're gonna make it flat. You're gonna remind people that this is a drawing, not a real thing, which is, you know, if that's your intention, fine. Like Alphonse Mucha, he does that with his prints, you know, like he does some beautiful nuanced rendering in the middle and then he puts a fat outline around it, kind of reminding you, but this is a graphic because we're selling some cigarette papers or whatever it is that he's selling for people with his illustrations. So the reason why I didn't make a fat outline is because I wanted this to kind of group with this shape. Having too much fun. Ain't gonna stop. I will stop in just a couple of minutes, hours, days. All right, so I'm truly gonna call it a day, a night. Gosh, okay, I'm gonna rip myself away. To honor the time that I said I would do this within. So there you have it. I hope that this gave you a good overview over this technique and you saw some of the challenges and some of the beautiful possibilities that it has, let me review briefly the main pointers that I want you to keep in mind. So next time you decide, you know what, I want to draw this person, beautiful person, I want to draw them. Hopefully you don't know them, so you can practice. Their skin is, let's say, middle value, maybe darker. Then you go to the store and specifically pick a paper that is kind of the natural local value of their skin. And then make sure that you match the roughness of the texture of the paper to the medium you're hoping to use. So if you want to use something very dusty, very chalky, use something with more grit. And if you want to have something more slick like a graphite pencil, you use one that has less texture. And make sure that you draw on the correct side, not on the side that has all the grit, but on the other side. So the bumpier the paper, the softer your medium. Then the second thing, or the next thing, is you want it to be your midtone. The paper is meant to be your midtone, not your highlights, not your shadows. And because the shadows will receive the charcoal or the marker or the pen. Keep your values separate. So don't blend your shadow pigment, like the charcoal, with your light pigment, being the chalk. It looks very messy. Let the paper do the heavy lifting there. And work gradually with your white. So don't press full throttle on the white right away. Kind of build it up gradually so you know how it looks in context to the rest. Okay, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. I'm going to look at, there's one thing. So you had neither tone paper nor white pencil, but at least you learned something. So I hope, now if you ever feel inspired, you can try this out, come back to this lesson. And you ran out of gel pen. Oh my God, we just had a cluster, tonight. But as I said, I'm not a fan of this brand. So if anybody can recommend a better brand, this is the Uniball Signo. If anybody wants to recommend a better white marker, I'm all ears. You can put it into the comments below, or hit me up on Instagram. I'm at Kira Studios. And if you want to share your drawings from tonight, that's where you want to tag me, because then I want to give you a virtual high five for doing the thing that we all love so much. And thank you for being here, and can't wait to see any of your drawings, and I'll see you next week. Not sure yet what animal, so if you have recommendations or requests, let me know. And I'm kind of thinking birds, just to let you know that that's where my mind's going. So if you have something else that you want to do, let me know. Okay, take care, have a great weekend soon enough, and I'll see you next week.